From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It's getting harder to recruit and retain police officers. Is it a robust economy giving people more options in a hot job market? Or are fewer people interested in a risky job that is increasingly under the microscope? This week on Newsmakers, the executive director of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association, Sid Wardell. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Ted Nesi is off this week. On the second half of the program, we are going to break down this week in news with a reporters roundtable. Joining me will be my Target 12 colleague, Walt Buteau, and Dan McGowan from the Boston Globe. But with me now, Sid Wardell. He's the executive director of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association. Sid, good to see you again. Welcome to the program.
Same here. Thanks for having me, Tim.
All right, so what is the single biggest issue facing local law enforcement from an administrative point of view right now?
Recruitment. We're having issues as far as getting applicants, even just initial applicants, and then from that point taking those applicants for individuals that are willing and able, and making sure that they're qualified for the positions.
That might surprise a lot of people at home, Sid, because you often hear about people on a list to become a police officer or with the state a trooper and having trouble, even if they get through the academy, having trouble getting on the job. Why is it harder for local law enforcement to recruit right now? What are you seeing?
Well, I think there's been some changes that have happened that the public knows about, such as pension reforms and how different communities are dealing with what they can give for benefits to their officers. The other piece of it is the job of law enforcement now is so scrutinized. It's public. Anything that law enforcement does, somebody has a camera and social media, all that information is out there to be shared with everyone. And I think people see that scrutiny and sometimes shy away from it because whether what you do in a split-second decision is then going to be criticized.
How old were you when you became a police officer?
20.
All right. So if you were 20 years old right now, Sid, would you go for the job?
I would go, but if I was a chief, I don't think I would hire a 20-year-old because the immaturity level and what you need for somebody at that point, they haven't had life experience. I was lucky in my position when I got it. But I will tell you, what you're looking for in individuals, you really need a well-rounded person.
You know, some people at home might be hearing this and going, wow, there are opportunities right now in law enforcement. Is that a true statement? Should people be getting their resume together and considering entering law enforcement?
Absolutely. I was speaking to a chief this morning, and he is putting one recruit into the next academy and said that he had room to put two, but he couldn't find a qualified person for that second spot. That's and I think that's telltale across I know it's telltale across Rhode Island, but I know it's also an issue across the country.
One of the other challenges you're facing right now, we've done a fair amount of reporting on the disaster of the what we call intake at the Attorney General's office right now. There were thousands of cases that were never charged as a felony, and let's not litigate all this again. People can Google it and learn more about the different reasons for why that is, but when you boil it down, either there wasn't enough evidence from police officers or the Attorney General's office over the years failed to take the next step on it for many different reasons. From the local law enforcement end, you guys are trying to gather all those records that you need to keep track of those cases. What is it that you're looking to do right now?
We're looking to do a statewide records management system. Right now, every department, what they have for records is within their own department, sort of within a silo within their agency. What we're looking to do is have a statewide system so that all of that would be shared. It would be in a location, it would do things for the law enforcement, but it would do a ton for the community as well, such as data. When we're looking at data and we say it's a year and a half old, because we have to look at every department to get that data. Talking about Rhode Island, this would be live. This would be information that would be available to our stakeholders like DOT on crashes and DWIs and all of those.
Who would manage it?
Well, we're working on that. The Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association has taken the initiative on it. We're working with the state police. We're working with Providence PD, who are pretty much the two biggest agencies, and trying to work through that and see where it could be housed. Providence PD has been willing to do that, but we're just trying to see if that's the right way to go.
I assume it's not free. have you have you found funding for it?
We've received some funding or commitments, some from Department of Transportation, who is a very large user of our data, and we're working on the others. We're working on possible monies from, originally we had looked towards Google funds with the Attorney General. That doesn't seem to be able to work out. But we're working on other funding streams, and that's really where we are now. We've gone through the process. We've identified what we want to do and the product. We just need to find the funds.
We're talking to Sid Wardell, who's the executive director of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association. Sid, let's move to Smith Hill. One of the bills your organization put forward is asking lawmakers to require that all concealed carry permits, so this is a right for a citizen to carry a handgun on them, to go through the Attorney General's office. And correct me if I'm wrong, but right now a citizen can go to their local police chief and apply for that concealed carry permit, or they can go to the Attorney General's office. Why do you want to centralize it within the AG's office? Wouldn't a police chief know his community and who's in his community better than, say, somebody in Providence at the Attorney General's office?
That's a fair statement. So local law enforcement should be a part of that process. But the other thing you said was centralized. And that is the Attorney General's office is the central repository, or could be the central repository. They would have the ultimate say to oversee. Remember something, a local police chief has authority within the four corners of their boundary. They don't have authority outside of their jurisdiction. But this particular case, and only this that I know of, that gives a police chief the authority to give somebody to do something outside of their jurisdiction. So I mean, for a lot of reasons, it makes sense that it should be one location when law enforcement comes in contact with somebody. If it's a local PD that has given them a concealed carry, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not computerized in the sense of an inquiry that they could do in the cruiser. If we're going to do a records check, that goes through the Attorney General's office. So that would be centralized. It would be automatic to give it.
So right now it's a piece of paper that you can't check?
Well, I'm not saying it's a piece of paper, but it's a record within a local PD. Here we go again. It's data that's within a local PD,
Okay.
not on a statewide.
So have you talked to the Attorney General, Peter Nerona, about this?
We have.
And what has he said to you?
He is supportive of the idea. He's supportive of the concept of why we should do it. And we're working with lawmakers to...
Okay, but that's where you're facing the headwind, and I feel like every year the Police Chiefs Association puts this bill forward and it goes nowhere. Why? What's happening?
Well, as you know, what's going on in Smith Hill, anytime you're talking about guns, there is a large group, Second Amendment group, that's out there that rally around the idea that shouldn't be restricted. It shouldn't be given to one person.
So they view this as a restriction, is what you're saying, by centralizing the permitting process to them is a restriction. That's the argument you've heard on this.
Correct. I've heard it made that it becomes political because you're then at the whim of an Attorney General and what their idea might be of who should be able to carry.
Got it. All right, let's stick, another bill before lawmakers also dealing with firearms, but in a different way. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but you want the ability for officers in training to use what we know from Hollywood as silencers, right, on guns. What's that all about?
So we call it a suppressor.
Okay.
And so that it minimizes the noise that comes out of a weapon. So what we're looking for is right now that's against the law. No one can use those in the state of Rhode Island, not even law enforcement. So we're asking that in training, that law enforcement officers who are doing close quarter shootings, trainings within buildings, that if there's discharge of weapons, that they be able to use a silencer for those particular incidents.
So,
and that's a health issue.
Right, to protect. So either you're going to wear something to over your ears during training, or you're going to have what you call a suppressor. But here's an ignorant question for you. Why would you want to change the training scenario for officers? If a police officer is in a live fire situation, they're not going to have a suppressor, and they're not going to have most likely ear protection there. So why would you change the training scenario?
Well, because what's happening under the training scenario is they're wearing earmuffs to protect their hearing, right? Because it does cause a lasting effect. So we're starting off to say you've got to train the mind and the body to react, and that reaction right now is being suppressed. Better word, but being with the headphones or earmuffs, they're not able to hear commands. They're not able to hear everything that's going on. So it's really, where should we start in doing that? We've been doing the training with the earmuffs. Now we're talking about, if we were able to use the suppressors, you can lessen what they would need for ear protection and better be able to hear commands.
It is unclear if legalized marijuana will become a reality in Rhode Island this session, but most Smith Hill watchers say it's a matter of when and not if. With legalized pot, does the Police Chiefs Association support or oppose legalized recreational marijuana?
We oppose it.
Why?
For a number of reasons. I agree with you, and we agree that it's going to happen at some point. But I can only point to where we've come over the last 10 years, and that's with our medical marijuana program. Most people don't realize that law enforcement today cannot do inquiries on medical program individuals if it's not between the hours of 8 and 4, Monday through Friday, right? So there's things that we need to get right with the medical marijuana side that we haven't done, I think, before we even venture down onto legalizing it, and then what resources we have. We haven't put the resources into it on the medical.
Wouldn't could it possibly lead to more resources? That is the argument from the pro side when the law enforcement conversation comes up. Hey, look, cops in communities across Rhode Island, they're already dealing with marijuana, and as my colleague Walt Buteau has reported on, there aren't enough police officers trained to do the impaired driving part of marijuana. The argument is, by legalizing it, that will supply potentially a revenue stream to bring more resources to law enforcement. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree, but I would point out that statement stops short of, we have law enforcement officers that are trained as DREs, drug recognition experts. Where the shortfall is also in place and isn't talked about is the fact that our courts are not really accepting that. Our courts are still undecided on what they're going to accept for testimony from those DREs, okay? So until we get that in place, we don't know exactly what the law enforcement officers have to be trained to for Rhode Island. We know what the national trainings are. And then in between there, we have all of those cases are now being prosecuted by city and town solicitors. So you have 38 or 9
We should mention that
it
happens because they're misdemeanors for the most part, which that doesn't go to the Attorney General's office.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, we have just a couple of minutes left here, Sid. Attorney General Peter Nerona wants to change the possession without the intent to deliver of a small amount of narcotics to a misdemeanor, not a felony, and that will mean little to no jail time for convictions of those. It has a lot of support, even from some in law enforcement. Where does your organization stand on that? We
are mainly opposed to the wording.
Why do you sound like you're on the fence on that?
Well, because it's a work in progress. We are working with the Attorney General's office and with legislators. But where we agree is the fact that we recognize that a felony conviction has a very lasting impact on an individual. Their work, what they could get for a job later, what they could stay for housing, for federally, and for assistance, right? So we are completely on board with how can we make that minimized. Where we differ is we have things in our court system like a diversion program.
Yeah.
So you get arrested, you go through a process, they're helping you to with this disease, but there's some things that you have to do on your end in order to complete that. And then there's a way to get rid of that felony conviction. We also have expungements. We could change the expungement laws. What we see it trying to do is just change the rules from the beginning. It just says, okay, now it's a misdemeanor. There's no escalator. You can get arrested 30 times for the same offense of possessing under an ounce right now is what they proposed of fentanyl, and never increase on what happens to you from that original charge. Now, I mean, fentanyl, although 5, 6, 7 years ago wasn't that prevalent in this area, it's more and more, and it's more and more pure. And I mean, the amounts of fentanyl that it takes to kill people is minuscule. And those are killing people on our streets every day. So the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association, the reason I hesitate is we recognize that it's a disease. Mm-hmm. We recognize that we want to try to get to an area where we can help people. but I'm not sure just cutting off what the penalty is on the front end is the way to do it.
We have to go to a break, but real quick, I don't even know if this is on the table, but if the fentanyl piece was removed from Norona's legislation, would the Police Chiefs Association be a little more open to it?
Yes, but it's not just the fentanyl. I mean, we're talking about crystal meth, which is in the area. You know, so there's some real strong Schedule I, Schedule II drugs that are out there that he's looking to continue to be misdemeanors. That the scary thing is they're killing people, and we, you know, I'm not sure we're going to get together on that.
Sid Wardell, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. When we come back, we're going to talk about this week in news, and it's never a slow week in Rhode Island. We will welcome my colleague from Target 12, Walt Buteau, and Dan McGowan from the Boston Globe. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Thanks, Sid. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. On the second half this week, a reporters roundtable, and it's sort of a half circle at this point. I have my Target 12 colleague, Walt Buteau, and from the Boston Globe, Dan McGowan. Dan, we're going to start with you and the Providence schools. We had Education Commissioner Angelica Infante-Green on the program a couple of weeks ago, and we asked her about this state review that they're doing of the beleaguered Providence public schools. She told us they are planning on, quote, a lot of intervention. Yeah. And when people hear that, they go, okay, this is going to be Central Falls 2.0, right, when the state took over for Central Falls. Is that what you think is going to happen here? Do you think this is moving closer and closer to a state intervention?
I think there will absolutely be a state intervention. I'm not sure it will look the way Central Falls looks. A lot of people at home, you know, you hear state takeover, you think Central Falls, and you think, boy, is the state going to pay for the entire Providence School Department? I do not see a scenario where the $130 million or so that Providence spends on its schools alone just for the city budget changes. I think Providence will continue putting a big chunk, about a third of their budget is from Providence, the rest is from the state. So I don't think that'll change. What I think you will see, and what I think they're really looking at, and what they're zeroing in on in this review, is sort of who will kind of take over the district and run day-to-day operations. And particularly, one of the things that I know Mayor Lorza is very interested in is finding ways to alter the teacher's contract and finding ways to potentially, you know, really look at a longer school day, you know, forcing teachers to stay after school more, things like that. And from his perspective, the way to do that is by potentially having, you know, a state receiver or something like that.
So have legal intervention so they can change the collective bargaining agreement in a way that they haven't been able to do so far.
That's right.
That's going to be super popular with the teachers union.
It will not be particularly popular, although keep in mind, Providence Teachers Union does not have a great relationship with Mayor Lorza. Angelica Infante-Green has tried to get off on a better foot with the teachers union. Look, they're always going to push back about significant changes, but it's possible that the state could find a way to maybe work out an agreement potentially by marginalizing the mayor a little bit.
So one of the things I'm watching, which will be an indicator to me as to where things are going, is who they choose for the next superintendent. Yeah. Chris Marr is stepping down at the end of this month today,
yeah,
right? This is it. We're taping on a Friday. Who's going to pick the next leader? Is it going to be local or state?
You know, I think the mayor does not want to give up the ability to pick the next leader. The thing is you get an interim superintendent in place. Let's say the district goes through, the school board goes through this process and hires someone in the interim. What does that mean 6 months from now? We have no idea. And so I think the mayor will continue to probably fight to try to have a say at the table, but there's no question that the state wants to have somebody in there who's going to be a hard-charging reformer. And so I think that's something that's unanswered at this point.
All right, well, let's shift to a different topic. We'll go back to education in a minute. Third largest city by a hair.
So, like it's second or third. It's within a couple hundred.
Between Cranston and Warwick.
Right.
We're going to talk about Warwick right now. So Warwick, big city in Providence. You reported there's a federal investigation ongoing there. First of all, just from a reporter's perspective, how do you know that? And what do you know about the federal investigation?
Well, so Joe Solomon first told us about the
Mayor of Warwick.
Mayor of Warwick told us about it. He said federal investigation, and it was an interesting conversation. We were calling him about something else, and it sort of came out in that conversation as if to say what we were calling about. That's not a big deal. Why aren't you asking about the federal investigation? And
Luck is better than smart.
Right, and I'm like, hello? But we had asked them the month before, and so he acknowledged that the feds had been in there. He didn't say FBI, but then Council President Marola, in a similar fashion on Dan York's State of Mind, at the end of the show, like literally as they were going into credits, said, yeah, I've been interviewed by the FBI, and it stopped there, but then we've interviewed him extensively a couple of times since then. We've been pointed in other directions by various sources and have determined, or 3 people have told us, including Marola, that they were interviewed by federal investigators. 2 of them said the FBI. The 3rd did not say who. And 2 of them didn't want to release their names. And none of them would say on the record what they talked about.
Do we know if former Mayor Scott Avedisian has been interviewed? And we say the feds, this could be the Office of Inspector General for some federal agency, whatever it could be. Do we know if Mayor Avedisian has been talked to?
He said he has not been interviewed and he has not been subpoenaed. And that was as of last week.
Okay, so we know the feds are there. We don't know exactly what they're looking at.
We're pretty sure it started about a year ago. Multiple sources said that this type of investigation, as you know, white-collar crime, would take at least a year. Mm-hmm. We are told that there may be as many as 8 interviewed, and that there may be as many as a half dozen quote-unquote targets, but we do not know about subpoenas yet. We also Marola won't talk about what he was asked, but he did point out that the situation with the firefighters and the 2 side deals during the Avedisian administration, he didn't sign either one, but they were signed by people who worked with him. He says he didn't know about either side deal. But Marola has gone on record saying he thinks those side deals are fraud, and then his
regardless of a federal investigation.
But he then said, we'll find out when we're done whether the feds think it's fraud.
Let's stay in Warwick here, Dan. And I know it's mainly your colleague at the Globe, Ed Fitzpatrick. Yeah. Ed Fitzpatrick is doing some poking around there with the city budget. It seems like a hot mess, the budget. We're in a good economy, but yet, every community is facing a budget deficit. I don't want to say it's just Warwick, but looking at a close to $8 million budget gap, the school is asking for more money, and there was talk of scooping money from the school pension fund. Right. What is going on? What do you know?
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's your kind of very sort of situation that flies very under the radar for a long time. It reminds me a little bit of kind of the Cicilline administration in Providence to some degree. You generally think, and Mayor Avedisian was generally considered a good mayor who ran the city pretty well, and things fly under the radar. You don't, until you see a federal investigation, you don't see Walt Buteau knocking down the door to come in and really pay attention, and what you realize is, boy, sometimes years where you didn't want to raise taxes, then you don't have extra revenue coming in, and suddenly you're trying to scoop money from your pension fund. You've got a school issue. It sounds like it's kind of just a combination of a bunch of sort of bad factors. But to your point, what's really scary, and this is super important, is we're in a really good economy.
Right.
Things should be going great.
The Cicilline thing, that was
that's the one major difference. That's absolutely right.
But not only a good economy, a city with our airport, right. A city with $1 million homes, a variety of a very tax base, yep. Route 2, big box retailers. It should be thriving, yeah. Especially in this economy, and it's sort of stunning. The cities we've seen go into receivership or come close to it did not have any of those things. We're much smaller, and we're not our second or third largest city. It's stunning to me they'd ever have money problems, to me, especially in this economy.
Well, let's stick with money. We have about a minute and a half left. Dan, true or false, people are going to see a larger property tax bill in Providence this year?
The vast majority of Providence homeowners will see a tax increase this year.
So there's confusion there, but the tax rate's going down.
Right, that's right. Yeah, it's a classic thing where you lower the tax rates, but values skyrocket. A good thing, right, because of a good economy. But the mayor's budget proposal did not lower the tax rates enough to kind of hold the line for the actual tax bills. And in some parts of the city, Federal Hill area, we're talking 30-40% tax bill increases for residents over there. So people are going to be very surprised come, say, end of July when they get their first tax bills. They're going to be very surprised.
At 30 seconds, I'm gritting my teeth because I know my tax bill is going to go up. I think we're all seeing that, and that's because of the, every 9 years they do a hard reassessment in these towns, and the last one was during a recession.
Right.
So property
and
values increase.
To the other point, you can't have it both ways as a homeowner. You want your value to go up,
yes,
but you want your tax bill to go down. That's just not going to happen. And the values were, horrible the last time. And they think there were hundreds of properties for sale under $100,000 in Providence. There are none under 100 right now.
15 seconds, Globe officially launches this week in Rhode Island.
Really looking forward to it. We're going to have a daily news briefing roadmap that I'll be sending out every morning, Monday through Friday. We'll have a bunch of great stories next week, so really looking forward to it.
Dan McGowan, Walpito, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.